Okay, so next you're going to start reinstalling your boards. Now, as I mentioned in the other room, there has to be a gap between the board and the wall because your floor is going to expand and contract. As it absorbs moisture, it's going to expand. As it gets hot, it's going to expand, although heat I don't think affects it as much as moisture. But you can't have these boards crammed against the wall. And that's the way they were in the other room and this room. It was crammed against the wall on this side and also on the other side. And also the board was back flush against the back wall. So this floor had nowhere to go when it expanded. Now the installation instructions say for this floor, this is a 3/4 inch hardwood floor, that I should keep a 3/4 inch gap at the sides. So that's what I did. These rooms, that's a general rule of thumb because you don't really know how big the room is going to be, how much it's going to expand. But so I basically tried to keep it approximately 3/4 of an inch, and I did it on the back too. Now, normally you would try to keep this last board in place so that when you put your floor back in, everything lines up nice, and you're going to end at the same place when you get to the other end. In this case, I had to cut this back board, but I still wanted the floor to line up perfectly and end at the same place that it did before. See, so this board isn't crammed against the back anymore. I cut part of it off. So what I did to make sure that this floor was going to end up in the same place is before I removed the backboard, I took this marking pen and I held it against the tongue of the board. You see the edge of the board here, and the tongue is underneath. I held it against the tongue of the board and I made a mark on the wall just like that. And I did the same thing on the other side. So later, when I cut this back off this board and I reinstalled it, I made sure that the tongue still lined up with this mark, so that when I get to the end, the boards will still end up in the same place. Any boards that were trimmed to go around woodwork or anywhere else, that I could still use them. And also, you want to make sure that your floor doesn't start getting crooked. You want to keep these boards straight across. You don't want to end up with some boards that look obviously off on some weird angles. So you want to try to keep this floor straight as possible. Okay, so let's talk about reinstalling these boards. You're going to have to reinstall them and to maintain the gap at the walls, right? So right now, when they were originally installed, there was no gap. So what I typically do is I use one side to hold my gap, and I make up for it on the last board. So that way I don't have to cut two boards. I don't need to cut one to make a gap over here and cut another one to make a gap over there. I just have to cut one board. So I go over here, and here is my last board. And I can see that it's going to be quite a bit over. Little trick to cutting it is I turn it around. Now this is the end we're going to cut over here. So I turn it around this way, and then I adjust it to be the right space with the wall. And then I use my T-square like so to get over here even with the last board. And then I use my magic marker to draw a line. Then I take it outside and cut it. So that's how I do that. It was a lot easier than going and measuring. And remember, things don't have to be exact gaps here and cuts, because it's going to be hidden by the baseboard. Baseboards are going to cover a multitude of sins. So most of the cuts you make aren't going to have to be perfect. Okay. The one thing to remember is don't leave so much of a gap that your baseboard isn't going to cover it. So I always keep a spare piece of baseboard around to check. Now those light spots there are because previously they were covered from the light, and this wood reacts with light. So As it hits light again, the boards are going to darken up again, and you will never notice that light mark there. So that's the deal. So just make sure that you don't leave too much of a gap that it's going to be exposed down here. You don't want to do that. So that's how you cut the board. Okay, let's talk about installing these boards. This last row here, I installed the other day, but I haven't screwed it down yet. But just for purposes of showing you how this works, you put the boards in, like I just explained how you cut it. Okay, so you cut the end off that board. So you see you have the gap. Same thing on this side. You have the gap. Then what you do is you put the boards down and you have to put them together, and you want the gaps to close. Normally, just tapping it works good. I don't have too much trouble with out of tolerance boards and too big a gap. Sometimes I do, in which case I have a little plane. Okay, so this is my plane. This is a number 79 Stanley, called a side rabbet plane, R-A-B-B-E-T. A rabbet joint is basically what your tongue and groove is. You can look it up online and see what those look like, but it's basically the tongue and groove type of joint. And this is a plane for planing down the surfaces of those types of joints. And you can plane like this side here. If the board is out of tolerance, if it's too much, you can plane this off down here. And you can see on the plane there's blades here and here. And so what you do is you run the plane down the board like this, and it shaves off the surface. And you can do it on the other side too, and you can do it on this tongue, whatever needs to be done. So you tap the boards together. Now occasionally a board is a little bit more difficult to tap in. So this is where the floor tool comes in handy. So this is a pull bar. The way it works is like this. First of all, I always put a rag on the floor because I found that even though this has a little pad on the back, it'll still leave a mark on the floor. So I put this rag under here, and then you can do that to pull the boards in together. And you're definitely going to need it on the ends, like going in this direction, especially when you get up near the walls, because you can't get in there to hammer. So you do the same thing until these gaps close up. See, sometimes there's too big of a gap there, so that'll pull these boards together tight to try to eliminate as many gaps as possible. Okay. Then after you put the boards down, the next thing you do is you drill them. Now the drill I use, the bit, this happens to be a 5/32 drill bit because it's roughly the same size as the shank of these screws. Now, the reason you have to pre-drill it, at least on this floor, is this is very hard wood. If you don't pre-drill it, it'll split. So you have to pre-drill it, you slide the screws in. Well, first of all, before you slide the screws in, you're gonna have sawdust and things, right? So what I do is I take my chisel like this, and I go down the tongue of the wood to get all the rough edges off. You know, like especially when you get to the drill holes, sometimes there's a little extra wood that, you know, it didn't make a clean hole. So you want to get rid of all that. You want this tongue to be as smooth as possible so that the next board is going to fit in tight. So I do that after I drill. I go down the whole length of the board with my wood chisel, like that, cutting off the junk and the ends. Then I take my shop vac and I vac it all up. You want it everything to be clean. You want to keep your work area clean. You don't want any junk underneath your wood. Anything that's going to upset it, make it off, you know, throw it out of being level. Okay, so once you got your boards put together tight like that, you drilled your holes. The holes I drill about 8 to 12 inches apart, which is what the manufacturer said for your fasteners. Now in this floor, they recommend you use cleats. Cleats are like rectangular nails. Because electric floor nailers and pneumatic floor nailers, they only nail staples or cleats. But what I decided to do, because this is OSB and I had trouble with it nails pulling out of it, I use these screws. And like I said, these are GRK screws. You can get them at the big box hardware store. I got a whole bunch of them here. You can buy them 500 at a time. They have a nice star head. They don't strip. It works great. Works great with the drill. In fact, I will screw one in here so you can see how nice these work. And if you watch closely, you'll see this board actually pull down onto the subfloor. So I'm pretty sure I'm not going to have trouble with this floor pulling up again. So let's give this a try. Not down all the way yet. See, I don't know if you saw that, the floor actually moved down. Now, when you screw these in, you want to make sure that it's completely beneath the surface of this L-shaped joint, this rabbet joint. Because if it's not, the next board is not going to fit over it. And this wood is too hard to even give to allow that to happen. So it just won't go in tight. So the next board rather won't go in tight. So you have to drill these down till it's below the surface. And my battery's almost dead, so now this screw is below the surface. So my next board will be able to fit in tight. And this thing is pulled tight against the underlayment now. So after I do the rest of the boards like that, screw them in tight, I'll be in business for this piece. Then it's time to go get the next row of boards and repeat the whole operation again.